These new findings shining an even brighter light onto our past.
It wasn't a sermon. It wasn't a prophecy. It was a whisper, buried for 2,000 years. That's what stunned both scientists and spiritual scholars when a letter, sealed in wax, written in Aramaic, surfaced from a cave in northern Israel. What it contained wasn't fire and brimstone, but something far more dangerous: quiet humanity. And when the Joe Rogan Experience picked up the story, what followed was one of the most unexpectedly emotional moments in podcast history. Could this really be a message from Jesus? Why was it hidden? Why now? Experts, skeptics, and believers are all asking the same question. Was this ever meant to be found? The cave, the scroll, and the shock. It began like many archaeological surveys do, with low expectations and a small team of researchers combing through a remote cave system near Mount Arbel in northern Israel. These caves, carved by time and weather near the Sea of Galilee, have long been associated with ancient dwellings, hidden sects, and even Roman sieges. But what they found tucked inside a narrow rock alcove wasn't a potsherd or weathered tool. It was a scroll, sealed, wrapped in cloth, and surprisingly intact after 2,000 years. At first glance, it didn't look much different from other Dead Sea Scrolls discovered in the mid-20th century. But the researchers immediately noted two unusual things. First, the scroll was preserved far too well for its age. Second, it was wrapped in layers of organic cloth and sealed not with string or clay, but with a resinous wax-like substance, something typically used for protecting important or private documents. That alone hinted that someone didn't just stash it, they protected it. After the scroll was carefully transported to a lab and gently unsealed in a controlled environment, it revealed a tightly coiled parchment filled with a fading but legible script. And that's when the second shock hit. It wasn't written in Greek or Latin, the typical languages of the period's religious texts. It was written in Aramaic, the spoken, everyday language of Judea in the early 1st century. This choice of language immediately shifted how scholars saw the scroll. Aramaic wasn't used for formal proclamations or widespread teaching. It was the language of personal conversation, family, and inner thought. When the translation began, the writing didn't resemble scripture, law, or even organized theology. It was short, direct, quiet. And then came a name in the opening line, Yaakov, in modern English, James. Specifically, scholars now believe this letter was addressed to James the Just, often described in early Christian tradition as the brother of Jesus. That's when the final shock came. The voice of the author, the structure of the language, and the time period all pointed to a singular, extraordinary possibility. The scroll might have been written by Jesus himself. If true, it would be the first known written text directly attributed to him. Why is that so significant? Because historically, Jesus has been understood as a teacher who spoke aloud, not someone who left behind his own writings. The Gospels were written by his followers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, often years after the events took place. Jesus himself, according to church tradition, wrote nothing down. But this letter changes everything, or at least challenges everything we thought we knew. The document wasn't dramatic in appearance, nor grand in length. But as experts pored over the words, its personal tone, intimate phrasing, and emotional honesty stood out. There were no grand declarations, no miracles, and no sermons. Instead, it read like a man quietly unburdening himself to someone he trusted completely. Even before its contents were made public, scholars involved in the translation were stunned. One of them reportedly said, "This isn't scripture, it's confession." The implications were massive. Not just historically or religiously, but emotionally. Because if Jesus ever wrote a letter, this might be it. And somehow, it had survived 2,000 years without anyone knowing. But the content of the letter would prove even more stunning than the find itself, not for what it claimed, but for what it quietly revealed. A letter that changed everything. When the translation of the scroll began, researchers weren't prepared for what they found. This wasn't a theological treatise or a call to action. It wasn't a sermon, a parable, or a prophecy. It was something far more intimate and far more unsettling. The text didn't try to convince, convert, or command. Instead, it revealed a voice that sounded profoundly human. From the very first line, the tone was unmistakable. The letter opens, according to scholars, with a striking and poetic phrase: "Let what is loud grow still, and let what is seen be known for what it hides." It reads not like a leader addressing followers, but like a man preparing to say goodbye, quietly, privately, without spectacle. This is not how we're used to hearing Jesus. The Bible presents him as a man of action, performing miracles, delivering impassioned teachings to crowds, confronting religious authorities, and challenging empires. But this letter has none of that. There are no miracles mentioned, no crucifixion foreshadowed, no resurrection predicted. Instead, we see something unexpected. Jesus burdened by the weight of his own truth. The phrasing is stripped down, emotionally raw. He writes to James not as a leader writing to a disciple, but as a brother writing to another brother. He doesn't ask James to preach or to continue a mission. He simply seems to want him to understand. One of the letter's most quoted lines so far reads, "The truth must be carried, and not all hands are made for its weight." There's no arrogance here, no divine authority declaring judgment, just a quiet sadness that the message he carried might be too much for others to truly hold. Another line reads, "They see only the fire, but not the hand that lit it. They repeat my words, but do not wait to hear them." It's a reflection on misunderstanding, a fear that his teachings would eventually be repeated without comprehension, perhaps even weaponized. There are no veiled threats against Rome, no anger toward religious authorities. This isn't a political document. It's not even a religious one in the conventional sense. It's more like a farewell. James is referred to not just as my brother, but as my brother in soul and blood. That level of intimacy is rare in ancient religious texts, and it reframes the idea of Jesus entirely, not as a figure of authority, but as someone reaching out, almost anxiously, to share a final piece of himself. Perhaps the most disarming theme throughout the letter is the repeated idea that truth isn't something to be preached, it's something to be lived. There's no instruction on rituals or rules. Instead, the tone suggests Jesus believed that the heart of belief isn't found in doctrine, but in how one quietly carries it forward. Even forgiveness takes on a new shape in this scroll. It's not framed around sin or guilt, but around misinterpretation and longing. One passage says, "Forgive those who use my name too quickly. They are not thieves, they are hungry." That line, simple and soft, might be one of the most radically compassionate things ever attributed to him. This wasn't a message for the masses. It wasn't meant for the crowds that followed him. It was something else, something smaller, something sacred. And that's what truly changes everything. Because for the first time, we may not be seeing Jesus the teacher or Jesus the savior. We might be hearing Jesus the man, hidden on purpose or just forgotten. The discovery of the scroll raised questions far beyond its authorship. While scholars debated whether Jesus actually penned the letter, an equally haunting question lingered in the background. Why was this letter hidden? And why so carefully? This wasn't the typical burial of ancient documents. According to the archaeological team, the scroll wasn't stored in a communal chamber with other writings. It was sealed in layers of cloth, coated in resin or wax, and wedged deep inside a crevice within a remote cave wall near Mount Arbel. This wasn't preservation. This was concealment. Dr. Elias Carman, a historian of Judean burial customs, put it bluntly during a podcast follow-up. This wasn't just hidden, it was entombed, like someone wanted it not just protected, but forgotten. And that changes the narrative. This wasn't lost in a fire or scattered by invading armies. This was put away on purpose, which leads to one inevitable question. What would make someone hide a letter like this? Some scholars suggest the letter was too personal, never meant for anyone beyond James. Maybe the author, whether Jesus or someone else, knew how volatile its content could be, not because it was controversial, but because it undermined the image of Jesus as only divine, only untouchable. In this letter, there is no claim to supernatural authority. There is only a human voice, wearied and deeply self-aware. Others think it may have been hidden during a time of early Christian persecution. The decades after Jesus' death were chaotic, filled with political crackdowns and doctrinal disputes. Many texts were lost, burned, or suppressed. But this letter doesn't seem like the kind of thing that would be confiscated by force. It was too quietly stored, too intentionally protected. There's another possibility, one even more unsettling. Maybe James himself hid it. Maybe the letter meant so much to him that he couldn't destroy it, but also couldn't bear for it to fall into the wrong hands. Perhaps he realized that if others read it, they would either not understand it or twist it, and so it sat in silence, wrapped, sealed, buried, not discarded, but deliberately set aside. Now, centuries later, its emergence feels like an accident, but is it? Some modern commentators, including those on the Joe Rogan Experience, have pointed out the eerie timing of the letter's discovery. In an age of spiritual confusion, division, and noise, a message like this, so quiet, private, and painfully sincere, suddenly comes to light. It almost feels too coincidental. Dr. Leora Saffron, a cultural historian, noted in an interview, "We're not saying it was meant to be found now, but it resonates now in ways that are hard to ignore." That sentiment has sparked debate among believers and skeptics alike. Was the timing just a fluke of archaeology? Or is there something about now, this moment in history, that makes us finally ready to hear a voice that had waited 2,000 years to speak? And that brings us to the core mystery. If this letter was meant to stay buried, have we just violated its silence? Or have we simply answered a call that was whispered long ago? Either this letter is a fluke, an accident of preservation, or it's something else entirely. A message not forgotten, but preserved for us. Joe Rogan's reaction and why it mattered. It started like any other episode of the Joe Rogan Experience. Two people, a long-form conversation, and a curious host willing to follow the facts wherever they led. But then, the guest, a scholar of early Christianity, said something that stopped Rogan mid-thought. There's evidence of a letter written by Jesus to his brother James. Joe blinked, leaned in. Wait, Jesus wrote a letter. You could hear the air change in the room. For someone who's covered everything from artificial intelligence to ancient history, Joe Rogan isn't easily rattled. But this detail hit differently. It wasn't presented with hype or drama. It was mentioned in passing, almost like a forgotten footnote. But once it landed, Rogan wouldn't let it go. He wasn't shocked that there was another ancient manuscript. He was stunned because no one had ever suggested that Jesus might have written anything himself. For millions of people raised on the idea that Jesus was an oral teacher, a man whose words were preserved only by others, the possibility that he left something handwritten, something personal, felt like rewriting the rules. Joe's reaction wasn't one of outrage. It was curious, respectful, even a little awestruck. He kept circling back. How is this not a bigger deal? How has this never come up? The guest explained the technical details. The scroll found in a cave near Mount Arbel, sealed in wax, written in Aramaic, dated to roughly 30 to 50 AD. But it wasn't the historical context that captured Rogan's imagination. It was the implication. We've got thousands of pages written about Jesus, Joe said, but this could be something from Jesus. And that's when the conversation shifted. It wasn't about doctrine anymore. It wasn't about religion. It was about the human instinct to connect with truth, and how much more intimate that truth becomes when the voice behind it feels real. What resonated with Rogan, and later with millions of listeners, wasn't just the discovery, it was the tone of the letter. The fact that it didn't preach, predict, or instruct. Instead, it reflected, it ached, and it felt, as Rogan put it, kind of like reading someone's journal. He compared it to opening a sealed notebook someone meant to keep private. You're not reading a doctrine, he said. You're reading a moment. A voice not amplified through churches or politics.
Biblical text, nearly 2,000 years old, gave us a rare insight into the history of Judaism.
But whispered through time, untouched for 2,000 years. The conversation soon turned to other ancient texts. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, writings that were discovered centuries later but excluded from the official canon. Joe didn't claim conspiracy. He didn't suggest cover-ups, but he did ask, with real weight in his voice, what else got lost? And that's where Rogan did what he does best. He made the mystery feel accessible. This wasn't just a find for scholars in dusty archives. This was something that could shake up your understanding of history, identity, and even belief. Without sensationalism, he offered something more powerful: permission to wonder. Because at the end of the episode, Joe didn't draw a conclusion. He asked a question. If Jesus did write just one thing, what do you think he'd want to say? And maybe that's why this moment mattered so much. Not because a podcast gave the story attention, but because, for once, millions of people stopped, leaned in, and really listened. However, a single question from Joe Rogan, simple, honest, and unscripted, did exactly that. What it means and why haunting. The letter, if genuine, does more than challenge historical assumptions. It redefines how we view one of the most iconic figures in human history. And it does so not with thunderous claims or dramatic prophecies, but with silence, restraint, and an emotional vulnerability that's almost disarming. What makes this scroll so haunting isn't its rarity, it's the tone. This isn't Jesus, the public speaker or the miracle worker. This is Jesus, the quiet brother, the man reflecting, doubting, reaching. No mention of the crucifixion, no grand promise of resurrection, no calls to action or prophecy of judgment. Instead, the letter offers a slow, aching awareness of what's to come and a simple hope that someone close might truly understand. One of the most striking lines, as reported by those involved in the translation, reads, "The light will seem to leave you, but it is not gone. It waits, patient, beyond the turning." It doesn't sound like something you'd hear in a sermon. It sounds like something whispered to a loved one in the dark. It suggests not theological certainty, but emotional clarity, a way of saying, it's going to get hard, hold on. That's why the scroll doesn't just raise questions about authorship. It raises questions about intent. Why was this the one message put into writing? Why was it sealed, hidden, and never spoken of again? Some theologians suggest the letter may have been written during Jesus' final days, after his arrest became inevitable, but before his public trial. A moment between storms, a breath before collapse. Others argue it could have been written even earlier, during a time when Jesus sensed that his teachings were being misunderstood, reshaped, or used in ways he hadn't intended. Whatever the timing, the emotional weight is unmistakable. Unlike the Gospels, this letter doesn't try to prove anything. It doesn't argue. It reflects. It breathes. It paints Jesus not as a flawless deity,
Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints reportedly passed away,
but as a man who felt the pressure of being misheard, a man who knew that after his death, his words would no longer belong to him, but to interpretation. One phrase from the letter stands out above the rest. "Forgive those who use my name too quickly. They are not thieves, they are hungry." That line alone has echoed in online forums, theological circles, and podcast recaps since the story broke, because it shifts the lens entirely. It says people might get it wrong, not out of malice, but because they're looking for something to believe in. That insight, compassionate, patient, and human, feels like a message tailor-made for a divided and distracted modern world. And maybe that's the most haunting part of all, not what the letter says, but when and how it re-emerged. A voice from 2,000 years ago, hidden in silence, suddenly heard at a time when noise and certainty dominate every conversation. What if this wasn't meant for scholars or skeptics, but for now? What if the timing isn't just coincidence? For all the analysis, all the carbon dating, all the speculation, one truth remains. This letter was never meant for us. It was meant for one person, one moment, one heart, and yet, somehow, here it is, whispering across centuries, forcing us to stop, listen, and ask, what if this is real? What if we weren't supposed to find it, but needed to? A letter in wax, a whisper in Aramaic, a voice once thought lost to time. Whether you believe this letter came from Jesus or not, it leaves a question echoing louder than ever. What if it's real? Let us know what you believe in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe for more mysteries from history, faith, and beyond. And if you want more stories like this, the ones hidden in silence, only to surface when we need them most, click the next video. Sometimes the past doesn't speak, it waits.